We talk about the legislative session that just ended, and then what we can look forward to politically through the rest of this year, which is, of course, a big election year. Generally, legislators who are from the area join me. Tonight, Peter Obarno could make it here, so Peter is here, one of my colleagues in the legislature, and Joe Kent, who many of you know, is here too. So it really isn't super formal. Each of us will take a turn and make a few kind of opening remarks about what's been going on, and then we'll take questions for as long as you guys want to ask questions. But first, let's have an invocation and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll just say a quick prayer. Dear God, thank you for bringing us together this evening here, all in good mind and good spirit and good body, to talk about what lies ahead of us in our beautiful state for the coming year. Please give us good judgment, discernment, goodwill, and good spirit as we try to improve what's going on in our state and reclaim what's great in our state. And give us the ability to see the good in each other and everyone, whether friend or foe in the political arena, to try to get good things done. Look over each of us and remember those of us and our families who have fallen and are gone, and give us the grace to move forward in the best light and to your greatest glory. Amen. Amen. And the pledge. Joe, why don't you start the pledge?
Please join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so some opening remarks. I'll ask Joe to go first, since he's running for Congress, and we'll be talking a little bit more about D.C. and the federal issues. Joe, take it away for a few minutes, and then we'll follow up, and then we'll get to questions.
Sounds great. Thank you, Jim. Thank you guys so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. This is a great crowd for a Tuesday afternoon, so appreciate you guys all being here and being engaged. So Washington, D.C. Has pretty much one agenda right now, and that is to spend us into oblivion. This inflation that we're all feeling every time we go to fill up the gas pump, go to the grocery store, that is because Washington, D.C. has prioritized, well, pretty much everything else other than basic fiscal responsibility. That's what's driving inflation. Just last week, Washington, D.C. passed another massive omnibus spending program. So as opposed to actually going through and doing individual appropriations bills, they again waited until the last minute, jammed about 6 or 7 bills that should have been standalone so that we all have a chance to read them and make sure we're living within our means. They jammed them all together after dropping it on our representatives' desks about 48 hours before the actual vote. The bill was about 1,300 pages, so you know that the people who voted for the bill had no chance whatsoever to actually read the bill. Yet here we are driving towards being $35 trillion in debt. Guess how much money was allocated to secure our wide open southern border? Yeah, that'd be zero. They're not spending any money on securing our southern border. That's Joe Biden's agenda, fully supported by Marie Perez. As you guys know, she famously says that nobody loses any sleep at night over the wide open southern border, as we have people in our district dying of fentanyl overdoses. The fentanyl is coming right across that wide open southern border. I've made a couple different trips down to the border to witness it myself. Happy to get into more details later on when we do Q&A about that. But look, Washington, D.C. has a very basic responsibility from the federal level. That is to protect our nation, to make sure we're not being actually invaded. It's most certainly not to spend our taxpayer dollars on facilitating that invasion, but that's what Biden, Perez, and all the Democrats are doing. And then to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar and not spend us into oblivion. That's what's driving the cycle of inflation. Despite how bad things are on the federal side, I am optimistic about November. Marie Perez and many Democrats ran as moderates. Joe Biden ran as some sort of a unifier. But if you look at what they've done to the economy, if you look at what they've done with the border and crime and protection of our children and getting us involved in countless foreign wars all at once, we're on the precipice of World War III. We can talk more about that here later on if you'd like. But based on all of that, I'm optimistic that people are waking up and understanding that this isn't sustainable. So as we get out there and we knock on doors and we get into this election cycle, I would really encourage you guys as Republicans, as conservatives, or just concerned citizens to not be afraid to talk about issues, because when we talk about issues, we win. The other side has nothing but insults and lies to throw at us. We win when we talk about policy, when we talk about issues. So looking forward to getting more into it here in a minute. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Peter, why don't you take it away for a few minutes and talk about Olympia and points west of DC.
Well, I know you're here to ask questions, learn a little bit more about the initiative, so I'll just be brief and talk a little bit about, what we saw in the legislative session this year. And I'll talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and what I would consider the scary. If November turns out that the Republicans don't gain seats or a chamber in the legislature. On the good side, three of the initiatives passed, right? We've got Pursuit Back, which we fought very hard for. We've got a ban on the income tax, a personal income tax, which we've fought long and hard for. And I know that Representative Walsh has talked a lot about, that's part of our history and tradition. That's what makes Washington special. Not having an income tax helps bring people to our state. And that is going to be a really, really important one. And then a parental bill of rights. As a dad of students, having those rights enshrined in a bill of rights that allows parents to access school records is really important. And it doesn't matter, what side of certain social policies you are. Every parent should have a right to know what's going on in the classroom and be able to make sure that their kids are their values are being respected. Some of the other good things are the capital budget, which invested a lot in substance abuse, a lot in treatment facilities for mental health, a lot in K through 12. We did a lot of investments in making sure that our kids have a good learning environment. A lot about early learning, especially in our community. Early learning is a desert. So there were some really good things that happened in the legislature. Now the bad, there was a lot of bad things that happened in the legislature. Three of the initiatives that will be on the November ballot never got a hearing and never got voted on. And although 800,000 unique voters in the state of Washington signed one of these initiatives, they never got the chance to be heard in a legislative hearing or voted on. And I think that's something that we got to make sure that people keep that energy up in November. Another is broad-based tax cuts. We did not invest in you. It's your money. You know how to spend it. Your households are struggling. All of our households are struggling. The power of the dollar is much less now, and there wasn't any broad-based relief. There was no property tax relief. That is something that we need to fix. So there was a lot of bad. And then obviously there's the ugly. The ugly was starting to phase out natural gas and bans on natural gas, which is just absolutely crazy to do that. And we did that in the wee hours of the morning. Started debating this around 2 in the morning while the temperatures were plummeting below freezing. And we know that that a lot of folks, especially in the Puget Sound energy region, 900,000 natural gas customers. And they phased it out in the wee hours of the morning when the voters were sleeping, when nobody was watching TVW, and then they found out the next day, oh, by the way, Puget Sound Energy can now phase out all your natural gas. That was something that should never happen. We should have transparent government, and we shouldn't be doing that way. And then linking the carbon credit market to Quebec and California was another one that is just going to drive the costs up. You'll hear a lot over the summer about the linking will stabilize the market. Yeah, it's going to stabilize the market up here. It's not going to stabilize it back down here. It's not going to lower that. The cost of gas in California and Quebec is far higher than the state of Washington's. And even at $52 a credit in the state of Washington, your gas prices went up 50 cents a gallon. And when Ecology came before the Environment and Energy Board or committee, and we talked about this, they could not tell us, or they chose not to tell us, what the impact of linkage would have, because they haven't done that study yet. They have not done that analysis. And I talked about this a lot. Even the state of California did that analysis, and I actually read it on the House floor, how much it's going to cost our people. Those in our community who can least afford this gas prices now, I read how it's calculated, and Ecology still refused to tell us. Now, to just touch briefly on the scary. You know what's scary? That we're in the middle of a crime crisis. Burglaries are at an all-time high. We have that actually highest in the nation. Violent crime is high. Property crime is high. And at that same time, here's what's scary. House Democrats voted to reduce sentences for gun, gang, and drug-related crimes around protected zones like schools. That's Bill 1268. It passed the House along party lines.
This is true.
Luckily, it did not pass the Senate or be a law right now, where somebody can commit a gun crime around a school, around my children, and rather than have consecutive sentences, it would be concurrent. So it would be a reduced sentence. Worst off, it's retroactive.
Oh, no.
Other things that the House Democrats, and believe me, these are bills that will come back, because they've been in 2 of the sessions. This is my 4th year in the legislature, my 2nd term, and I've already debated this bill twice on the House floor, and it's passed twice. Other things are letting sex offenders, not letting them, requiring sex offenders to be on the Sex Offender Release Policy Board. So sex offenders will determine how they are released and what their conditions of release would be. There was also bills that reduced sentencing for aggravated assaults and murders. These are bills that were introduced. These are bills that were voted on. These are bills that were sponsored by House Democrat majorities. And I can assure you, if we don't change the tide in the state of Washington, they're going to come back and eventually they're going to pass. Another bill I'll just touch on, because this one was a little crazy because I watched the hearing, but I wasn't on state government, was allowing people like Derek Ridgway, who are serving life sentences for murder, manslaughter, to not only vote now, but also to serve on a jury and to hold public office. And I am not kidding you. It's hard to believe these are true, real policies, not just bills that get introduced. These are bills that have been sponsored. These are bills that have had hearings, unlike the 3 initiatives that you'll see on the November ballot. And these are bills that have actually passed the House floor. So the scary is, when we look at this election, and you say, man, it's bad and it probably can't get worse, I assure you it can. And it probably will. So I don't want to take up too much time because I know it's a lot of questions, but the good, the bad, the ugly, and the scary. And we need to make sure that not only are we here listening, we here are active, but that we get our neighbors active and we stay active, because this is going to be a long election. And it's going to be flooded by cash from Washington, D.C., and it's going to drown out our message, his message, all of our messages. So we need to talk to people now before that money comes in. We need to make sure we get the word out and that we turn out the vote. So with that, thank you.
All right.
Sorry.
Well, thanks, Peter. Now that you've scared everybody.
Right?
I'll try to go through what's happened again the last few months quickly and kind of set the stage for our questions and the rest of this town hall. So there are good signs all over the place in the state right now about politics and the direction the state's going in terms of elections and law and public policy. So it's not all bad. In fact, there's a lot of good. The good started really about 7 months ago. We at the state party, state Republican Party, really wanted to get out of the gates quickly last year with demonstrable success, with demonstrable wins. Because a lot of people who are conservative, leave the Republican Democrat thing aside, people who are conservative or moderate in the state have gotten very discouraged, gotten very disheartened. They feel like their votes don't count. They feel like their voices aren't counted. And so we wanted to find things we could do quickly that would show that we're doing good, that there is a reason to vote, there is a reason to speak. And what we had last fall were in the odd numbered year here in Washington, we had the local elections. So you had your city council elections, your mayors in many cities, and school boards. And what we decided last fall to do was to get involved with some of the school board races around the state. Normally, the state party doesn't get involved directly in school board races. They're local and they're nonpartisan. You don't run as a Republican or a Democrat for school board. But people are people, and people are conservative, or they're not conservative, or they're moderate, or they're left-wing. So there's still politics in school board races, even though they're not partisan. So we picked 36 school board races all around the state, geographically, both sides, east and west, all corners, and we tried to pick those 36 school board races that were examples, that were good tests of areas that were not Republican, not Democrat, not left, not right, but were swing, and some that were more red, some that were more blue. We tried to get a mix. And what we did as the state party when we identified those 36 races is we offered the conservative candidate in those races our help. And basically whatever kind of help they wanted or needed for their campaigns. A lot of the help they asked for, the candidates, was fundraising. And so we didn't cut them a check, we didn't give them money directly, but we helped them fundraise. We gave them names of people who donated to previous political campaigns in their area. And we kind of sorted things for them and prepped things. And in some cases, we would help them with the ask, right? We'd give them talking points that would help them ask people for contributions to their campaigns. In some cases, they wanted help with messaging. They knew in their heart what they wanted to do on a school board, but they didn't know the things to say. And so we helped them with talking points and with messaging. And in a few cases, they wanted help with like flyers, designing handouts to give people. So whatever they needed, we helped with. And the main thing we did in these 36 races is we ballot harvested. We helped the candidates make sure that when ballots were mailed last fall, that people who were moderate or conservative knew the ballots had been mailed, knew it was time to vote, and if they needed help getting their ballot to the county to be counted, we would send somebody to go get it and take it to the county election office. That's called ballot harvesting. In some states it's illegal. In Washington state, it is entirely legal. And conservatives have been slow to adopt it. And that's been an advantage to the other side. So we tested all these ways to help, and our help of the school board candidates was extremely successful. 32 of the 36 candidates we supported got elected to their school boards. It's worth support, it's worth clapping. That was a quick win and a good win. That shored up those 32 new school board members around the state, helped grow out the conservative caucus within an organization called WASDA, the Washington School Directors Association. That's the group of school board members that all school board members, almost all of them, have to be part of as school board members. WASDA for years has had a very left-wing bent to it. And the growing conservative caucus within WASDA is becoming a stronger voice in that world and bringing WASDA's actions and their agendas and their priorities more to the middle politically, and that's a major win. For a long time, WASDA's policies were decided by what was called weighted voting. The different school board members from around the state actually had a different level of votes when the organization would vote on a policy position based on the size of their school district. So larger school districts members literally had more votes than smaller school districts directors. Well, the conservative caucus within WASDA was able to undo the weighted voting policy within that organization. And now, in that organization, every member gets the same one vote on policy decisions the group is making. That's a major win, not just for conservatives and moderates who are school board members, but for smaller school districts, which were being actively discriminated against in how the organization made its policies. That's just one example of the good that's happening. So we took that win and transferred our activity, our attention to, as Peter mentioned, to this group of 6 initiatives. Now, as you know, initiatives have a kind of mixed history in our state. They are well established in our state's constitution. They are the people's voice in law and policy. They have been used in various ways throughout the state's history. And lately, they haven't been used as much. The most well-known promoter of initiatives was a guy called Tim Eyman. You all know Tim Eyman, at least his name. And his initiatives were successful. They were mixed. Some were successful, some were less so. But Eyman drew the attention of the current Attorney General, this Bob Ferguson. And the state Attorney General has pursued Eyman and prosecuted him and really persecuted him to such a degree that Eyman has had massive personal financial troubles because of legal expenses and basically been taken out of the initiative business. And that's really what the state Attorney General was trying to do. He was trying to get Eyman out of initiatives. So there's been a little bit of a vacuum in the initiative world, and of course nature abhors a vacuum. Someone filled it, and that someone was us. We a group of us got together and started drafting initiatives that would change bad law and reform our taxes. Our taxes in the state have gone out of control. They're driving up not only the cost of gas at the pump, they're driving up groceries at the grocery store, those prices, they're driving up utility bills. These are all based on state taxes that were recently put into law. So we put together a group of 6 initiatives. 2 of them were pure policy. That was the one that restored police pursuits of criminals and criminal suspects in vehicles. Restored that. After the George Floyd riots about 4 years ago, that was the guy in Minneapolis who died when he was in police custody. At the time, the media said the cops killed him. It later turned out that wasn't true. He died of a drug overdose while he was in custody. So, I mean, it looked bad, but the outrage that followed, which was not fact-based, caused many states to change their laws on police pursuits. Now, we screwed up a lot at that time about police, law enforcement, police activity in this state. But when I talked to police officers, sheriff's deputies, chiefs of police, sheriffs, they said the single most important step we could take was restoring that pursuit piece, allowing them to chase criminal suspects again, which for the past 3 or 4 years they've not been allowed to do. And you've all read or seen the stories about how they had to watch criminals flee in a stolen vehicle because they couldn't, by law, chase them. So this initiative reverses that. It goes back to the standard before George Floyd, where a frontline officer using reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed can chase a criminal suspect. And that initiative, when we pulled it, tested it, it scored almost so high it was unbelievable how much support it had. I mean, when you do these polls and you get to a policy point and the support is like at 88 or 90%, you begin to wonder, well, is this even right? Because nothing polls that high. But this polled very high in popularity, and the support was broad-based. It wasn't Republicans, it was Democrats, it wasn't conservative, it was everybody. I mean, all races, all 59 genders, everything. All demographics supported restoring police pursuits. And then the second, as Peter mentioned, it was the Parents' Bill of Rights, which is primarily an informational notification thing. It doesn't change a lot of law, it's true. But it does say that parents or custodial guardians or grandparents, they must know what's going on with a minor child. Primarily in the school environment, but in some cases in healthcare or mental health care environment space, they need to know what the child's going through. Now, the child may be able to pursue, receive, and ask and get health care the parents don't agree with. That's current state law. But the parent has to know. At least the parent has to be informed of what's going on. And in the last few years in Olympia, there have been a number of bills passed that instructed teachers or counselors or doctors or therapists, or in some cases even law enforcement, to actively withhold information from custodial parents about the well-being of their child. And this Parents' Bill of Rights says no. The parent or guardian must be told what's going on with the child. And I think that's essential because it reflects the reality that most parents are loving and supportive of their children. And they want to help their child, even if the child is in trouble, is depressed, is stressed. Parents want to help their kids. But this idea that's sown all through our state law, that parents can't be trusted with the well-being of their children, and that they are abusive, that families are abusive by their nature, is wrong. Most parents love their kids, and they want to help them regardless of who the kid is and what the kid's going through. So this Parents' Bill of Rights reasserts that truth. And then the other four were in various ways fiscal. They were tax related. One of them states clearly what most people think is already in law, but it's not. That there will be no tax in the state of Washington based on personal income. It's shocking how many people thought that was already law, but it wasn't. It is the tradition of our state, but it was not in law. And then the other three are more targeted tax reforms, and those people love. Repeal the Climate Commitment Act, the cap and trade tax. That's next to the police pursuits, probably the most popular of the 6 initiatives. Repeal the capital gains tax, the state's capital gains tax. Controversial because in most of the world, a capital gains tax is considered a form of income tax. But in our state, the Solons on the state Supreme Court ruled that it is not an income tax, it is an excise tax. An excise tax is a tax on a transaction, on a deal. And this has been around and around, but what the initiative says is, doesn't matter whether it's an income tax or an excise tax or a duck, it's repealed. And that's clarity that our tax policy needs. And then the last one, the 6th, it doesn't repeal, but it makes optional. It makes you able to opt out of the payroll tax, state payroll tax, that funds this so-called long-term care benefit program run by the state government. The long-term care benefit program is a sham. It's a rotten deal. You pay with a payroll deduction, so it's out of your paycheck before you get the check. And the benefit, so-called, is $36,500 lifetime maximum. Well, if you've had anybody who's been in nursing home care, which is where this benefit is directed, that's about 3 months. So it's not long-term benefit. So that's what the 6 initiatives do. A couple of points in pure policy, then 4 fiscal tax reforms. And all of them were polling very high. In order to qualify an initiative so it goes forward either to the legislature or onto the ballot for people to vote on, you need about 340,000 signatures of registered voters in Washington state. All 6 of these initiatives got almost 500,000. So they all got more than the signatures they needed. And it was easy to do. People were happy to sign these 6 initiatives. In the late part of the year, last year, December-ish, we delivered the signature petitions to the Secretary of State in Olympia, and all 6 initiatives were certified as qualified. They had enough signatures. That was a second win. Then we began the legislative session in January of this year in Olympia, and these 6 initiatives were initiatives to the legislature. So they go to the legislature first. And the legislature can pass them into law if it chooses to. Or if it doesn't, if the legislature ignores them, then they go to the people for a vote at the next general election. So that's this coming November, the election that's got the president, the governor, and everything on it. It's going to have these initiatives too. Well, initially in Olympia, the Speaker of the House, the most powerful legislator, and this is Olympia, not D.C., the Speaker of the House in Olympia is a woman by the name of Lori Jenkins. She's out of Tacoma. And initially she said very clearly, well, we're not going to give any of these 6 a vote. These are outlandish initiatives. They reverse all of our progressive wins.
Yeah.
And then they saw their polling numbers about the initiatives. And we're like, oh no, these are super popular. And if we ignore all 6 of them and they go to the ballot in November, 80% of the people voting are going to vote for the initiatives and probably vote conservative on down the line on that ballot. We can't have all 6 on the ballot in November. So they came up with this split the baby policy strategy of pass 3 of them into law, the 3 most popular by their reckoning. Pass them into law now in the legislature so they're not on the ballot, and then let the other 3 go to the ballot where we can spend a bunch of money saying how horrible they are and convince people not to vote for them. Well, so they split the baby, but any of you who've read the Bible know that strategy generally doesn't work. And I don't think it's going to work for the left in this state. The 3 that they passed, again, were the police pursuit, the family, the Parents' Bill of Rights, and the no state income tax. So those are in law. We're going into law now. There's a little bit of a cooling off period, but then they take it into the law in a couple of weeks. And really, the beauty part of this is, by our Constitution's rules, the governor has no role. The governor doesn't have to sign these like he does a bill, and he can't veto them like he can a bill. So it was glorious to see the current governor, shaking his fist and screaming about how horrible this was because he had no role in the whole equation. Nothing to do with it. The 3 that we didn't vote on, they do go to the ballot this November, so you will see them. Those 3 are repeal the cap and trade, repeal the capital gains, and opt out of the payroll tax for long-term care. This was a great win that we got the 3 passed. And it was glorious to see on the floor of the legislature. I mean, it was like a revival meeting. I mean, the left legislators who just weeks before had been saying, all cops are bastards, law enforcement is inherently racist, we don't support this patriarchal system and all this stuff. Now it was, oh, hey, we love cops. We want the police to be able to pursue criminals. It was a complete about face. And a lot of these, of my colleagues there, Peter's colleagues, they did it without blinking. Because they're not intellectually consistent people, they're politicians. And once the power they were happy to follow the new power structure. And the new power structure had a good effect on the whole session. We were better able to knock down bad bills because the speaker and the leftists there were trying to figure out how to respond to these initiatives, and they were distracted. They weren't focusing on their parliamentary procedure for getting all their bad bills passed. And we were more successful in killing bad bills. So it had a good effect there. And I think that good effect is going to carry on. Because the left, for the first time in 30 years in this state, they're scared. They're losing, and they're not good at losing. They haven't been losing in a long time. So they don't know what to do when they start to lose. And we're going to continue to pour coal on that fire, and I use that term advisedly, for the next few months leading into November. There were a couple of other things that happened too during the session where we won and will continue momentum building. One was, you may remember, a group of left-wing zealots in the state did one of these goofball lawsuits to try to get Donald Trump removed from the presidential primary ballot. And in some states, the Republicans have said, oh, don't touch that, just let it go, let the courts decide. I thought, no, we're going to fight this here in Washington because it's a stupid idea they have to take someone off a ballot because of allegations of wrongdoing with no charge, no conviction, no nothing. And so we fought it aggressively. And the lawsuit to get him off started in Kitsap County, that court, it's all in state court. That court kicked it over to Thurston County, normally a very bad place, because the judges in Thurston County are pretty left-wing. But I was confident that the take Trump off the ballot argument was so dumb and so weak that even a liberal judge was going to have to shoot it down. So we fought it in Thurston County Court, the state court, drew a woman judge who is not the most left-wing, but pretty left-wing, an Inslee appointee to the bench there. And she heard the case, she heard we had the hearing, she heard the arguments, and to my happy surprise, after considering the arguments, she came back and said, the argument to take Trump off the ballot, which is based on this kind of cockeyed reading of the U.S. Constitution's 14th Amendment, is goofy. And no, we can't make the Secretary of State take him off the ballot for these kind of screwball reasons. I am not going to sign the order to take Trump off the ballot. Trump stays on the ballot. This was from a left-wing woman judge in Olympia. So this was a great win. And she didn't particularly love us. She doesn't like Trump that much. But she acknowledged the other side's argument was so screwy, it couldn't hold up to any kind of scrutiny. And as you may remember, then about a month later, the U.S. Supreme Court took the issue into consideration. They didn't consider the Washington case directly. It was a Colorado version with the same arguments. And their logic that the U.S. Supreme Court used to slap down the Colorado attempt to get Trump off the ballot, and therefore all of them, because it was the U.S. Supreme Court, basically reflected the Thurston County judge's logic. So I think we had a good effect on the outcome of this, not just here in Washington, but nationally. So that was another one. And we have this momentum building. I mentioned the presidential primary. The last bit of data that will give you some encouragement is that presidential primary vote we just had a couple of weeks ago. Very controversial because you have to check the box on the outside of the envelope saying what party you identify. A lot of people didn't do it. They didn't want to do that. They thought that was an invasion of their privacy, and they're not wrong. It is an invasion of their privacy. It is a bad public policy. It was a law that was passed in 2019, an update of another law that requires that. The law requires a declaration of party affiliation. It doesn't require it to be on the outside of the envelope. That's a bureaucratic decision that the state secretary of state made. And when we pressed him on that, he said, well, here's the reason why you put on the outside of the envelope. It's easier for us to process. So a lot of people didn't vote at that. About 30% of the people registered voters statewide voted in that presidential primary. Here's the good part. The total number of votes, Republican versus Democrat, in that partisan presidential primary was closer than it's ever been. The split was about 5 points. It was like 52.5 Democrat to 47.5 Republican, approximately. That's closer than Republicans have been in that election, that vote, in like 20 years. So that was pretty good. And the more heartening news is the Secretary of State was tracking some of those responses by different demographic cohorts, how different age groups and different groups were voting. The youngest voters under 25, it was a statistical tie between Republican and Democrat checkboxes. That's shocking, because in the last couple of decades, Republicans have been losing young voters by a spread of something like 30 points. Now, the Democrats still had a very slight lead in this presidential primary, but it was tiny. It's like a point. So we see trends that are favoring common sense conservatives in this state, and that's very hopeful. So we are going to build on this momentum as we go to November, and we're going to take away from those school board races last year a lot of things, but especially the ballot harvesting part. We are going to actively pursue ballots of people that we model and calculate are moderates or conservatives. And we're going to make sure, we're going to call them, we're going to email them, we're going to knock on their doors, we're going to make sure they vote. We're not going to vote for them, because that's illegal, and that's what other people do, but we don't do that. But we are going to pick up their ballots and carry them to the county if need be, and make sure that the moderates and conservatives in the state vote. I believe that's going to make the difference in a lot of elections. Peter's in mind for the legislature, but we're neighbors of places that like common sense conservatives anyway. But also other people are going to benefit from ballot harvesting. And I think we're going to win races that we haven't in the last few years. So that's it. I'm sorry it took this long, but that's kind of a summation of where we are. There are other things going on. There was a crazy lawsuit about redistricting legislative districts. We can talk about that. There are more bad bills, some of the ones that Peter was mentioning. Anything related to the budgets, I mean, Joe's right. You know, the federal government hasn't passed a proper budget in 20 years.
Yeah.
They're operating under temporary resolution after temporary resolution. That's a mess. And I don't even want to talk about it, but Joe can talk about what's going on in Ukraine and other parts of the world that are troubling. So let's get to questions and have as much of the rest of our evening here we can as questions. Just raise your hand and I'll call them. Go.
What are we going to do about the split in the Republican Party? Because we are not going to win a governor's seat unless either one of two things happens. Either we come together or we get two candidates that are willing to sign a pledge saying that whoever the Washington state delegates choose is the other will gracefully step down and back that other person.
I don't think it's a split. I think this is primary season and tensions and passions run high in primary season. I think the first part of your proposition, which has come together, is going to be what ultimately happens. I support the early convention that we have coming up next month in Spokane. I mean, I've championed that from before I was chair of the party. So I believe that the delegates will have the word in who gets nominated for not just governor, for all the statewide positions, and for the Congress seats. I mean, we're going to have a congressional nomination too at that convention. So it's more than just governor. You know, it's a little bit of a trap to only think of governor. We have a lot of elections we've got to nominate at that convention. You know, the pledge is part of the process. I would like to see every candidate sign the pledge, but this is America. I mean, I don't believe in the party forcing candidates or anyone to do anything. I don't believe in the state party forcing county parties to do or not do things. I believe we have to do things by persuasion. And if someone is determined they're not going to sign the pledge to support the nominee, all we can do is inform everyone that this person didn't sign the pledge and let every person decide how to vote.
But the WSRP does endorse whichever candidate is elected by the delegates.
For sure, that's the purpose of the convention. So, you know, it's not the state party that does the endorsing. It's the delegates to the convention that do the endorsing. The state party is the servant of the delegates. That's the other thing we have to get straight about politics. There's this idea that elected officials or organizations are above people, and that's not right. People are sovereign in this state, in this country, and the organizations like parties and elected officials serve the people. So it's not that the state party has any opinion, and in fact, as state party chair, I don't do endorsements pre-primary. But speaking for the state party, we don't take a side. When the delegates decide what's what, we will respond to their choice. And really, we're going to have to come together. You know, I don't like these primary seasons where everybody's sniping. I mean, shoot, Joe Kent lived through the worst of that a couple of years ago. The whole point of doing the convention earlier in the year than it used to be is to try to minimize all this primary inside intramural fighting that goes on, because that's what really handicaps us when it comes to the general elections in November. So I don't like this time of year particularly, but we survive it and we get through it and we support who's on the ballot. We support who the delegates like. There will be a state primary in August, and we'll have to see what happens there too. So it's a process. Other questions? Oh, come on, making this too easy. Yeah.
The initiative process has been remarkably successful. Are we going to dig in and put in a lot more initiatives? I hate to say we're going to rule by initiative, but that seems about the only way we can get things in.
Well, yeah, and it is constitutionally valid in the spirit of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 1. all political power is inherent in the people. Yeah, there are going to be more initiatives. We talked about, Peter mentioned this natural gas. It's not exactly a ban, but it's the beginning of a ban of natural gas in houses or commercial buildings. That passed into law, House Bill 1589. There might be an initiative that comes up to reverse that. That's pretty unpopular, and I think the initiative reversing it would be very popular.
I would think we'd want to get a bunch of them in there and get them.
Well, I mean, there's a logistical challenge. I mean, we know 6 is a lot. It was tough to do 6. You know, you probably don't want to be doing 6 at a time because logistically that's difficult. But I think you're going to see over the next several years, staggered out, you're going to see more initiatives.
Hey, Jim, can you, while you're on this point, can you talk a little bit about advisory votes?
Oh,
What
right.
happened in the
Well,
legislature?
you're talking.
This kind of helped a little bit too. So in the legislature, there's been a real big push by House Democrats, which ended up passing, which was banning advisory votes. Do you remember advisory votes? They're votes that are on your ballot that are fiscal notes, right? It's when the legislature passes some fiscal policy, you get the opportunity on your ballot to say yea or nay. Yes, we agree with it, no, we don't. Well, traditionally, on the ballot, the things that were passed by the majority were very, very unpopular on those advisory votes. Knowing this, they decided to abolish advisory votes, even though the people were the ones who chose to have advisory votes on their ballot.
It was an initiative originally that started advisory.
Right,
boards.
and then the legislature unilaterally said, well, we don't want to do this anymore because we don't like the results. We don't like what the voters are saying, so we're not going to put these on the ballot anymore. And I do think that the voters, whether it was going to be this year or in the future, we're going to get very frustrated with the fact that they lost that ability to share their opinion on how the legislature is doing. And therefore, that's what happened. And I do think maybe it was a little too soon to say it had an impact on the initiatives, but I think the rhetoric of Democrats in the legislature to begin banning that and saying, we don't want to hear from you on our job rating.
I think that drove the interest in the initiatives.
I
yeah.
agree, yeah.
It wasn't the whole thing, but it was part of it. Go ahead.
I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the guy was pretty interesting. He was talking about the electoral college nationwide. He said, as far as he knew, there was 0 states that did the electoral college. They only do popular vote. And is there a way? I mean, if we did, that would take some of the power, like the WASDA, would take the power from King County and, you know, all these big.
So I ran that bill, the session before Peter got to the legislature, I ran a bill to create a state electoral college. There are some constitutional issues with it. All it would take in theory is just a bill. It doesn't need a constitutional amendment or anything to put such a thing in place. The best way to resolve some of the constitutional issues to it would be to make it only for the office of governor. Analogous to how at the federal level, it only applies to the presidential election.
That would work.
But we have to find, it's one of these challenges, you have to find a governor who's willing to sign the bill that changes the way the governor gets elected. We could do an initiative to create an electoral college. And again, I would recommend it be narrowly focused on just the office of governor. So that could be another initiative.
And then we need to educate the people, because the left has been so good at demonizing the electoral college.
Oh, yeah, but some of that fever is broken. You're not hearing quite as much of it as you were before, of course, because their guy got elected in 2020.
Yeah.
Suddenly it wasn't so bad anymore.
On the initiatives, who writes the little stuff on the ballot?
Oh, great question, great question. The title and the so-called short description about the initiative that shows up on the ballot. Great question, I forgot to mention that. The person who writes the initiative, and I wrote the 6 initiatives, I actually cribbed some stuff Peter had done in some of the initiatives. So I drafted those 6 that are getting through the process now. The writer doesn't write the title or the short description that shows up on the ballot. the State Attorney General's office. So you submit the initiative, you submit it to the State Secretary of State. They kind of review it to make sure it is roughly would work, as formatted right, would work as a law. They have the Office of the Code Reviser, which is an inside the Capitol office that vets things, not for their constitutionality or legality, but just the format, the process, and the shape of it is right. They check it out. And then they send it over to the State Attorney General's office, where they write the title and the short description. Now, this is done at the beginning of the process. This is done before the initiative even goes out to collect signatures. So people are worried that the AG's office will try to mess with the title on these initiatives going to the November ballot now.
Right.
Now, that's already, they did that last year. The whole cycle is like an 18-month-long cycle. They did that at the beginning. The funny part is, on the last $30 car tabs initiative that got thrown out by the state Supreme Court, the Attorney General, the State Attorney General, was making the argument that it should be thrown out because the title was confusing to voters.
Who wrote it?
And the Attorney General had written the title. So it was absolutely Alice in Wonderland stuff. And some of us pointed that out, but the major media kind of whiffed on it. They didn't really cover that.
Of course not. That's the thing, they're so confusing, and sometimes I have to think that they're grammar right? Because you have some double negatives, or, I mean, it's not.
But some, that's true, you're right. Some of that is because of the way the initiative itself is written. And especially initiatives or referenda in the state, which are repealing other things, you do structurally get into some kind of double negative land. Because the thing is reversing another thing, and so the language does get convoluted sometimes. But I believe that the AG's office acts in a clever way about some of the titles they write. One of the reasons that we submit multiple versions of each initiative is so that the AG's office has to give each one a slightly different title, because each one's worded slightly differently, or the structure of the organization is slightly different. And that forces them to give different titles to different versions, and then we pick the version with the clearest title and run that one. It also hides from them, and I don't know if the camera's running, but this isn't that much of a secret. It hides from them which one we really like, right? We submit like 5 or 6 of them, and there's usually one we think is the best one, but we don't want to let them know immediately which the best one is. So you do a bunch of them, it's flooding the zone. All right, let's get another question. I want to get something federal, so we get Joe Kent. Go ahead, Mike.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the last time this number of initiatives were legislatively proposed and the subsequent election? Wasn't there some really good?
Well, I mean, the short answer is never. There's never been 6 that qualified in the same year. The most that the legislature voted on, I think, was 2. So they did 3 this time, so that was a record. Generally, they are a leading indicator. Initiatives are a leading indicator of the way the state goes in the next election cycle. So your question, Mr. Wizard, would be, is the next election cycle this one? Or is the next election cycle the next one? And I'm hoping it's this one.
Well, I was reading that some were passed and then there was a great Republican success in the
Correct.
following subsequent election.
Yeah, no, they are leading, they tend to be, successful initiatives are a leading indicator of success in the next election. That's true.
Just to be a little bit cynical here, can you introduce a bill or perhaps another initiative that bars the Attorney General from writing the brief descriptions and titles of initiatives if they're actively campaigning for political office, or just switch it entirely to an independent third-party counsel or the code revisor's office?
I don't think that would take a constitutional amendment. That would just be a bill, right? It's not, this stuff, this process is not in the Constitution. So it's just in statute. All it would take is a bill to do any one of those things, and all of them are a good idea.
And do initiative for term limits for the governor.
Sure, sure. It's a good idea, thank you.
Or in-person voting. Yeah.
The trouble with that kind of voting reform, election reform as an initiative, is initiatives have to address only a single subject in the law. There's a single subject rule. The trouble with election reform, we all want to get there, back to in-person voting, is it is a multi-part thing. And in order to get back to where we want to get, it probably would take several, I mean, Peter, you're both an attorney and you've been on the state government committee which looks at election law. What's your take on getting back to in-person voting by initiative?
I think we'd have to read through statute, because you'd have to deal with the in-person voting, you have to deal with the absentee ballots for overseas, you'd have to deal with, the fiscal note on that would be pretty substantial, so you would likely be wanted to go through statute because of the fiscal note that would be on the initiative to do that.
It would take multiple initiatives to change all parts of the law.
Do we have anything in our state law about counting? I watched a thing on New Hampshire, and New Hampshire's state constitution says that they have to be hand counted. They have to be visually seen, 2 witnesses counting ballots. Is that our state constitution?
No, it's not. That would require, obviously, a constitutional amendment. And I can't think of a better way to do it. I would want to put it in the Constitution to say that. But that would take time and a lot of support. The first thing we need to do is get enough legislators in Olympia to begin the process of amending the Constitution.
And that's my question. What is your prognosis? I know it's early, but what's your prognosis for flipping some seats in the House? Let's go with it.
In Olympia or in DC?
In Olympia.
Hard to unpack that. Previous leadership has basically overpromised what they were going to deliver for new seats. I don't want to do that. Also, I mentioned briefly that lawsuit about redistricting. That could have a major influence on what happens this November. That lawsuit was a lawsuit brought by a bunch of Seattle-based left-wingers who didn't like the redistricting that happened after the 2020 census. Remember, after census every 10 years, and then the year after the census, we shift the lines of our legislative and congressional districts. The theory is to reflect changes in population that the census showed. This has been going on for as long as we've been in the country. So in 2020, there was a census, of course, and then in 2021, in this state, we have a bipartisan commission that is appointed by the legislature that handles redistricting every 10 years. This is a good system. It's better than other states where the legislature just argues over it and does the redistricting as a bill. That gets very partisan. That ends up in that gerrymandering where you've got the crazy octopus-shaped districts and things like that. Our system, where it's a bipartisan commission, generally, for years, for decades, has done a better job of redistricting in a way that is rational and you avoid the worst game plan. So basically, these left-wingers from Seattle were angry there wasn't more game playing. And so they filed a lawsuit saying, we need more game playing in our redistricting. They used the argument that Hispanic voters in Yakima, particularly in Yakima, were underrepresented in the 2020, post-2020 redistricting. So they did this lawsuit, they screamed a bunch of racism, system is racist, all this kind of stuff.
Which they are.
And then the federal court in Seattle, this federal judge in Seattle, decided that the left-wingers, his neighbors in Seattle, were right, that the Yakima districts were not sufficiently representing Hispanic Latino voters in Yakima, and redrew the map in a way that looks like octopuses and weird animals and amoebas and all these crazy legislative districts. And the great irony was, so the theory of the lawsuit was Latino voters in Yakima are not concentrated in a single district, so they can elect a Latino representative. Except for the fact that they were already represented in Olympia by a Latina state senator. So they changed the district. The judge's map doesn't concentrate more Latino voters in one district. It actually dilutes the number of Latino voters in that district. And it redistricts the Latino state senator out of the district. So now she's got to run in a different district. So if your goal was to have more Latino representation, you failed on both counts, right? But the judge did this, and we're challenging it. It's not really us, the party, but it's a group of friendlies to the conservative side are challenging this. They're appealing the federal judge's ruling, currently it's going up to the U.S. Supreme Court, where they're trying to get a freeze on that judge's work and stick with the map. Back to your question, Scott, this issue could affect very much the outcome of the legislative races in November. Doesn't affect Joe that much. The congressional districts were also redistricted, but that's not the focus of the lawsuit. The lawsuit's on the state legislative districts. So we got to figure out from the U.S. Supreme Court whether they're going to let the judge's version stand or the commission's version that was before the judge's version. If the Supreme Court freezes the judge's version and the commission's version stands, then my answer to you is we will probably pick up some seats in November. I don't know how many, but maybe 3, 4, 5, something like that. If the judge's version stands, it's going to be more difficult to pick up even that many because his map is not designed to help Latino voters, it's designed to help Democrats, and it does.
So much so that the lawsuit in Yakima actually impacted this district because the 20th district just lost all of Thurston County.
That's right.
Yeah. And the 20th district then moved down and picked up another 10,000 voters in Clark County, all the way down to Vancouver. So interesting, he picked a map, not one that had the least impact. Actually, he picked the map that had the most impact and affected the most number of districts, which is this.
Which he was not supposed to do, but the guy wasn't listening to the law anymore. I mean, and so, yeah, he changed the 2 legislative districts in Yakima, but those changes affected 13 other districts, less directly, but they all changed a little bit.
I have a question about outside money coming in, influencing state races and state issues. I mean, it seems so unfair that it seems like each state should take care of their own and not have outside money. In my world.
Sure.
Do you have any comment on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a complicated thing to answer. I mean, also, this is America. People have the First Amendment right to spend their money how they want to spend their money. And I kind of don't mind. A few years ago, there was this guy, I forget his name, but from California, the big environmental guy.
Steyer.
We can't even remember his name because the stuff didn't work. Huh? Steyer, yeah, Tom Steyer was his name, that's it. So he was some, I don't know, was a hedge fund guy or something from California, and he decided he was a big Inslee fan, and he was gonna dump a bunch of his hedge fund money into politics up here in Washington. And basically, he got creamed. I mean, almost everything he spent his money on, they lost.
Good.
And so at the time, there was all this talk, to your point, well, should we restrict how much someone from out of state can put their money into Washington elections? And I'm kind of a free speech guy. I mean, if Tom Steyer wants to blow $50 million on stupid campaign contributions that are failed, I consider that a stupid tax. Let him do it. I mean, if I wanted to give 10 grand to a legislative race in California, why can't I do that? I mean, so I tend to fall on that side of the equation. And you're going to hear a lot with these initiatives about rich guys trying to buy democracy and all this. There was a rich guy who's more sympathetic to conservatives who helped fund a lot of the initiatives. You probably heard his name, and it's Brian Haywood. His name's been in the paper a lot. And the left is saying it's one rich guy trying to buy elections, which is hilarious because left-wing rich guys have been buying elections in Washington for 30 years. Right, exactly. And it's going to be more of that. There are a couple of left-wing, usually Microsoft or tech-related guys who made a bunch of money there, and they push a bunch of left-wing stuff. And there's a guy called Nick Hanauer, he's a piece of work. He inherited all his money, but he claims that he's a hedge fund, Wall Street investor. He made like $2 on his investments. He inherited like $100 million, And he's a big left-wing guy, and he gives money to all the left-wing movements. And then he criticizes our guy, Haywood, who actually was raised poor and made all his money himself. It's like, I'd rather take the self-made guy over the inherited money guy. And how the world has changed. The Democrats are the ones with the trust fund guys buying things, and the Republicans are the ones where people made it themselves and are trying to do things. I like where we are. I'm sorry, that's sort of a rambling answer to your question, but I'd say let the money flow. The good thing we have in the state is the Public Disclosure Commission, the PDC. And Scott and all of us who have to comply with it know it's a pain in the neck, but it's a good pain in the neck. Our state agency that tracks money in elections is actually pretty effective. And it's hard to hide money in elections in Washington state. And you can go to the PDC, it's literally pdc.wa.gov. They've got a website, and you can go put people's names in, and you can look up who contributed to them and how much and when. So I think the answer to money in politics isn't banning it, it's transparency. It's make the reporting clear so you can see whose money is where and what it's doing. Joe, you want to chime in on any of this?
I mean, on the federal side, it's the FEC and dark money, which is what we usually talk about a lot. That's usually super PACs. So if you guys give to my campaign, your name directly shows up on my FEC report. Same thing for giving any federal candidate. But then there's super PACs that technically can't coordinate with the candidates. They can come in and they can take unlimited amounts of money. They can spend it. Again, they're not supposed to technically coordinate, but the Democrats have a ton of super PAC money that supports them. Perez had a lot of Nancy Pelosi directed super PAC money working on her behalf, but she's also using a cutout herself. She's one of the co-chairs of the Blue Dog Democrats, and as she says, the Blue Dog Democrats, she wants to turn them into a rural Antifa. But if you look at the way that she votes,
Rural Antifa, isn't that a contradiction in terms?
If you look at the way that she votes, there's a direct correlation with who donates to the Blue Dog PAC. So Marie Perez can't get enough more and more. She voted to leave our troops stationed in the Middle East. She is in a dead sprint right now to try and get billions more sent over to Ukraine and every other foreign war. The Blue Dog PAC is heavily propped up by major defense contractors. Same thing, big farmers donating to them. And most interestingly, because she votes to leave the border wide open, you've got this corporate Wall Street interest in leaving the border open because it brings in more cheap labor, drives down U.S. wages. Company famously, Tyson's Chicken, just said they want to hire somewhere between, I think it's 50,000 asylum seekers, which every single illegal immigrant that comes across the border, they claim asylum because they're not stupid. They know that's their golden ticket into the country. That Tyson's Chicken is giving money directly to the Blue Dog Democrats who are in turn voting to start border wide open. So we're going to be highlighting a good deal of how Marie Perez's votes are influenced by her donors on the corporate side. If you go to joekenforcongress.com, there's a link on there that says learn the truth about Marie Perez, and we have where a lot of her money is coming from with the receipts to prove it as well.
And that's the same point. I mean, it's transparency is what's key. The federal, Joe's right there, the federal rules are a little more flexible. The state rules are a little clearer. It's harder to hide the money in state elections. So it's a little easier to play those games with the federal elections, unfortunately. I think you're next.
Joe, it's kind of hard to ask you many questions. On the Uniparty, that swamp is so bad right now, but.
Remember, I'm the chair of the Uniparty. It's like, really? I'm the chair of the Uniparty? Well, that's news to me, okay.
Well, it's a select club. There's a few of them that aren't in it, not many, but there's a few. Anyways, this new one I was reading about, was it yesterday or this morning, that alphabet red flag law?
Yeah.
Which is going to affect Washington. Any Democrat state's going to be happy
I mean,
to.
this just proves that the Republicans who voted for that last omnibus, which the majority of Republicans did not vote for, it was passed with Democrat majority, there's red flag laws baked into that. And so it just proves that these guys didn't read that bill at all. They knew there were some work in there maybe for their district. It was 1,300 pages. They said, what the heck? Next thing you know, they're rolling out. And now we have red flag laws that are baked into that.
Pretty serious.
So they didn't really outline. So here's the thing too, like a lot of times you'll hear that certain things are getting funded and Republicans will say, well, I didn't vote for that. Or Democrats have said this too, I didn't vote for that. But it was either baked into the bill or they funded the organization pushing that through. Like there was DHS funding in this last bill. So Perez and other Democrats will come back to the district and they'll say, hey, I voted to fund DHS. That's going to seal the border. Well, that's not going to seal the border because the DHS is actually transporting illegals across the border via the CBP1 app, and and they're paying for their forward integration into major urban areas. So we're paying for that. So by funding DHS with our taxpayer dollars, driving up more inflation, they're paying for the invasion. It's the exact same thing with those red flag laws. And also there's crypto digital backed currency that's baked into that as well. And then same thing with the tracking for cows. If you're a rancher, they're going to start tracking electronically the cows, and it's part of the Green New Deal agenda. All of that was baked into this last omnibus. We're going through it. We're about, I think, three-quarters of the way through that bill. We've been working on it ever since. My team, which is like 3 or 4 people, to kind of break it down by section. But I can guarantee you the people that voted for that thing, they didn't read it. And now we have not just more debt, we've also got a ton of bad legislation.
You talk to DC all the time now. I can't think of his name, and he was a Freedom Caucus guy, the one that's leaving Wisconsin April 19th.
Oh, yeah.
Which means they
He was
can't
not
fill
from
the seat.
Gallagher?
Can they get, yeah, Gallagher, can they get him, or is anybody working to get him out of there before the 19th, so they
I
can?
think they come back into session right after Easter, and they've got about 2 weeks of working to get him expelled. So that's going to take a Republican team effort. Because if he leaves, there's only going to be one seat majority, or one vote majority.
Well, I heard this is an open plan to give it to the Democrats, but if
Yeah, it
they
is.
get
It
him
certainly
before-
seems that way. I mean, when you see all these people leaving and they can't just hang out till November and at least vote the party line,
Right.
I mean, that's pretty obvious what's happening.
Yeah, well, hopefully, I'm hoping they can get him out before the 19th, and then,
All right, a couple questions in the back.
Yes, well, the influx of illegal immigration issue, and going to the blue states, the population changes obviously in the census. How is that census going to change our representation in the state and federal level?
You
I
want
mean,
to take a first?
that's exactly why they're doing it. So why did the Democrats open the border? Why are they willing to let 13,000 Americans be killed with fentanyl overdoses? Because they want the 12 million illegal immigrants to come into the country. That's why DHS is busing them to major urban areas, and why a lot of them are ending up in sanctuary states right here. Because like you said, the next time they conduct a census, they don't check who's a citizen, they just count heads. Based on that head count, you need your federal, U.S. House of Representatives, seats drawn up, and then same thing at the state level. So Trump attempted to pass a law that said that we would only count citizens, that got shot down, and didn't pass, and so now here we are, it's a numbers game. And so the Democrats have said, hey, we're willing to let basically any terrorist group or foreign adversary come into our country, willing to let the fentanyl come into the country, as long as we can get more heads to count to create more legislative seats.
That's an important point, because people worry that illegal aliens are voting, and in some cases, a few cases they are, but they don't have to vote to influence elections, because the way the census works, and that redistricting we're talking about works, they're counted in the census. So if you concentrate populations in already blue areas, that brings more legislative districts into those areas. So you don't, the immigrants don't need to vote to influence elections just by being here,
But
being
isn't census
counted.
only done every 10 years?
Correct.
And it was just done a couple years ago.
Well, I mean, we're at 2024 already, we're almost halfway through this cycle. That lawsuit took a few years to get through, but we'll be back at it in 5-6 years, and I think there'll be more support for that proposal than when it comes to citizens.
Well, Washington State has taken over 350,000 illegals. Is there any tracking? Is there any, do we have any
Well,
indication?
not only is there not tracking, current law, we get questioned about sanctuary state all the time. Sanctuary state, and we are a sanctuary state per Mr. Inslee, is not a law. That's an executive order that declared that. So, but there is state law that has to do with immigration. Now remember, immigration 90% federal, but there is state law that says that state agencies, including law enforcement agencies, cannot interact with the federal immigration authorities. And this comes to a point primarily in things called immigration detainers. They are essentially warrants for illegal immigrants in the U.S. And what the state law that does exist says is that our law enforcement agencies, other agencies too, but it affects primarily law enforcement, cannot honor a federal immigration warrant on a person who's an illegal immigrant here in this state, in Washington. That is law. That's not like the Sanctuary State Declaration, which is just a letter to Santa Claus. That's law, and that needs to change. And we have the bill that would say, forget that, law enforcement can honor a federal detainer, but the current governor won't sign that into law.
Isn't that why we have one less state patrol?
Yes.
That is exactly right, and probably more than one less, but one
That
recently.
one for sure.
No, yeah.
For Joe, they're currently flying flights from foreign countries, flying illegals into this country. We're not hearing enough of that. I mean, that's direct presidential decree.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's so blatantly illegal.
And we're paying for it.
Yeah.
The CBP One app, you can basically make your appointment to get taken either from an airport into the United States of America, or right when you get across the border to take it to a major city. So yeah, we're paying for all of this. And again, this is why Democrats are pressed to come back and say, well, I funded DHS, therefore I secured the border. This is why I say the Republicans surrendered a lot of their leverage. They should not have funded DHS. This is what DHS is being used for. They're being used to facilitate the invasion of the country. So, and then another thing too that was baked in this last omnibus bill that didn't make, they also issued out of the blue 12,000 special immigrant visas to Afghan refugees. Now, special immigrant visas, I worked intimately on this when we were leaving Iraq, and we had to vet these people. I sponsored 3, I had to testify in court. It was about an 18-month process to get these guys, who I knew very well. I worked with for years overseas. They saved American lives, they deserve to be here. But it was still an 18-month process to get these guys vetted, and they weren't allowed to come right to America. They left Iraq, we sent them to Qatar, and then we sent them to Europe. And while they were vetted independently, and then Afghan withdrawal, whoever could get their way, you guys remember the dramatic footage, whoever could fight their way onto an aircraft or knew the Taliban who was running the checkpoint well enough to get through the checkpoint on the aircraft. We brought 120,000 of them into the interior of the country. Now we're going to bring 12,000 more in. And those guys, because they're on special immigrant visas, they're going to be able to utilize chain migration to bring in more family members. Yeah. And these people have no vetting whatsoever.
And some of them were at that place in Tukwila.
Well, they're flying them, my understanding is they're flying them in the middle of the night directly in the Boeing field. The DHS.
I mean, I know that there was one homeless camp in Tukwila that was rife with these Afghan.
Yeah.
And they're homeless. I mean, they're in a homeless camp in a church parking lot in Tukwila.
Where are they now?
In a hotel somewhere else in King County.
Why are we wasting our time?
So, my question to Joe, other than fundraising, what can we do to grease the skins, as it were, to get you in office? Other than fundraising, what things can we do to?
Well, Peter and I are already there. We need to although we'd like to stay there, at least for a little while longer.
You guys are all doing a phenomenal job at putting forth the information we need to know what's going on and keeping us up to date on what's going on and doing just a great job to do the work. But
I mean, I'll jump the line just a second, Joe. You need to talk to your neighbors.
Yes.
I mean, I believe so much in one-to-one, person-to-person marketing. I mean, it's word-of-mouth marketing. It's about politics, but it's word-of-mouth marketing. And we talk about these things like the immigration detainers and the Afghan emergency visas. A lot of people don't believe this stuff is real. You talk to them about this and they're like, that's Fox News, that's not real. No, it's real. And so I believe very much in talking, having that slightly awkward conversation you'd rather not have with your mother-in-law or your neighbor, because I think we can win hearts and minds one conversation at a time. And we do as much of that as we can, and the Q&As I do are basically to give people tools to have those conversations. But we need to do more of that. So, I mean, Joe, take it away from me.
I mean, that's first and foremost, to have those conversations. My website, we have that special, Learning the Truth About Marie Perez link on there, and that's got pretty much chapter and verse with receipts what her voting record is, because there's the way the media portrays her, and they basically say Marie Perez and the word moderate, every other time. But if you look, completely objectively at her voting record, it's anything but moderate. It's the same voting record as Nancy Pelosi. So I always ask people, of course, I need donations, but if you can't donate, I say go to that link, The Truth About Marie Perez, and send that out to 10 of your friends that you know are on the fence and say, hey, do your own research. This is what she stands for. Are you good with that? Are you good with an open border? Are you good with all the inflation? Are you good with her voting to let biological men into her daughter's locker rooms? I mean, it's absolutely
Didn't even get
insanity.
onto that stuff.
And that's
You're another half hour.
And that's the entire that's the entire Democrat Party. I would say show me a Democrat that is against this radical trans ideology for our kids and one that's against, an open border. Like, mean, I think there's some common sense Democrats out there, but not elected officials. These guys are all in lockstep with that ideology. So that's a big thing. And also up here in Lewis County, especially for the 3rd district, the more people we get to turn out and vote from Lewis County, the more we can cancel out some of the more blue and purple districts in downtown Vancouver. So get your friends and neighbors out in Lewis County to vote.
We need the voter turnout here to be higher.
Big time.
The votes are good in Lewis County
They're really good.
for rational people, but the turnout numbers are lower than they should be. We need the turnout to be up. Let's do one more, and then we'll do closing remarks. I'm going to go to the back.
Yes, as somebody who's fairly new to PCO, well, I guess last couple of years, I've walked my district, I've talked to people, you can't, I am in a very conservative area, you can't go 2 or 3 houses without a Joe Kent sign. They're all over. What are a couple of points that you would give us to share with people who say it's not worth voting? It's not about picking up your ballot and driving it in, because I'm willing to do it. But what would I say to them to get them to even fill it out? Because I'm hearing over and over and over, our ballot doesn't count in Washington. It's not worth it. It's a waste of my time.
I would just say you were doing exactly what the Democrats want you to do. I got it, there's problems with election integrity, and we all feel that way. But the number one trick of this election integrity game is to convince conservatives that it's hopeless and just to give up. So when people say that, I throw it right back at them and I say, you are taking the bait, hook, line, and sinker. You're doing exactly what they want you to do. Even if you think there's problems with it, even if you think it might not count, what they fear the most is us turning out and voting. So don't give them an easy win, make them fight for it.
And use the 19th district as an example. So Peter represents the 20th district in Olympia, and we're standing in that right now. I represent the 19th, which is Lewis County west of I-5, out to the coast. I was elected in 2016 by 500 votes. It was just over the recount margin. I was re-elected the last time by almost 20,000 votes. When you show people you will represent them, and you will fight for them, and you will tell the truth, people get encouraged. They want to vote. And they know their vote counts. And the reason I can get away with doing this stuff, and Peter can get away with doing the stuff we do in Olympia, is we have the confidence of our constituents, and they have confidence in us. I mean, I do stuff that the smart guys in Olympia always say that's not a good thing to do. I talk too much about guns. I talk too much about pro-life. You know, you're not supposed to do that stuff in Washington. Well, you know, if people believe, if people have confidence and they're encouraged, they will get representatives who will talk about guns and will talk about illegal immigration and will say that gender-affirming care isn't care. But we have to have the people behind us. We get our power from voters. And if you're not voting, you don't give your power to your representatives, and you end up with Nancy Pelosi and Jay Inslee and, God help us, Bob Ferguson. And we don't want that. So ask them to look at the 19th. I mean, 8 years ago it was considered the blue wall in Southwest Washington. Now it is almost as red as the 20th, about a point less red. But, I mean, we've totally turned it because we convinced people it was worth a damn to vote. And they did, and they have, and more are. So, confidence is contagious. You know, winning is contagious. And we've got to get to that place where we're starting to win a little bit so people believe. I don't know. Let's get to closing. Peter, you've been quiet unusually quiet for a while. Why don't you wind us up here and say a few words?
I'll just be real brief. First, I want to thank you all for coming out and being so engaged in this process. This election, like every election, but this election, I think more than ever, is about changing hearts and minds. Democrats have held control of the governor's office for 40 years. The state house for 20 years. And except for some moments in time, about the same in the state senate, they really have had a trifecta. And where we are today is their fault, their policies, their control. So what I hope you do is exactly to build on what Representative Walsh just said, which is when given the chance to lead, we need to show that we can lead. Republicans haven't led the state of Washington in so long. I think some people have given up hope that we'll never get in the majority in the legislature or get a statewide office again. And that's just not true. In the legislature, we've tried very hard. I think we've proven that we can lead. We do have better policies. And given the chance and being trusted by voters, we'll show you that when you elect us by 500 votes, 8 years later, you're electing us by 20,000 votes because we've proven we can lead. We've proven to be trustworthy and to represent those folks in our community. So that's kind of what I would say. If you're going to take anything away from this town hall, it's that you heard from 3 people that you can believe in, you can trust, and that can lead this state and this country. And so share that with your friends, share that with your family, share it with your neighbors, because word of mouth, as Representative Walsh said, that's going to be the most powerful thing. Saying, I went there, I heard from them. This is what they're going to do. Here's their track record, here's their website. They do have a plan to solve the issues that are impacting every single one of us from Ponderay to Wacaico. So I just, again, thank you for coming out here on a weekday, late at night, and supporting us. Thank you.
All right, that's a wrap. Thanks for coming.
You're an attorney, right?
Yes.